Chapter 1. The moment he called me broken. He told me I was broken, that my need to understand everything made me impossible to love. That night, he turned off his phone and his back, and I realized silence can be louder than shouting. I didn't cry. I made a list. A list that would rebuild my life piece by piece until the woman he called broken stood on a stage years later and thanked him for giving her the reason to begin again. My name is Julia Hart, and this is how being shattered became the start of becoming whole. The year I turned 35, Portland felt both familiar and slightly out of tune with me. Our small place on a tree-lined street in Laurelhurst wore its charm like a sweater that had started to pill. Hydrangeas along the fence, a porch swing that still creaked from the day we hung it. I was supposed to love this house because it was the logical step after the wedding, after the graduate program, after I passed my licensure exams. I did love parts of it, the morning light across the kitchen tile, the way crows hopped along the neighbor's roof like they were carrying secret messages. But the rooms had begun to sound hollow, as if the life we had promised to fill them with had stayed in some other version of us. My husband, Cole Harrington, was 39 and a project manager for North Arc Systems. He spent most weeks shuttling between Portland and Seattle. Sometimes he stayed up there for days at a time when a release date turned into a rolling crisis. He used to text me little observations from the ferry or a coffee shop near the office. Lately, he mostly sent travel times, delays, an arrival window that kept sliding later. I told myself it was a season. I was a therapist. I knew about seasons. I knew about overwork and underrest, and the way people forget what they have at home when the office asks for more. I kept seeing small shifts. Cole putting his phone face down. Cole laughing at a notification, then dismissing the lock screen like he had swatted a fly. Cole coming home showering and saying he needed quiet, which is something I understood, so I handed him quiet like a glass of water and tried not to notice that he stopped asking about my work. When I mentioned a client breakthrough without detail, he nodded as if he had heard a traffic report on the radio. Useful perhaps, but distant. We were invited to a North Arc product celebration in Seattle. The invite arrived as a calendar block that had already accepted itself. Typical Cole, always assuming yes. We drove up on a Friday afternoon mist on the river, the long gray ribbon of the interstate pulling us north. He tapped at the wheel like he was rehearsing something. I pointed out a flock of geese lifting in a V over the water. He said that the new build would not compile, and then he went quiet. The event was at a converted warehouse near Pioneer Square. Soft Edison bulbs branded neon on a brick wall, a bar with 3 signature cocktails. Cole introduced me to a few developers whose names I forgot immediately. Then a woman approached with another round of smiles. She was a little younger than me, maybe 29. Light dress under a blazer, confident with a softness that read as approachable. She said her name was Tessa Bloom, and that she supported Cole's team. She asked about Portland, and said she had thought of moving there because the coffee was better. She told me in a warm tone that Cole admired my calm. "He talks about how grounded you are," she said. "It must be nice to come home to that." The compliment landed like a paper airplane, harmless on the surface, odd in the way it drifted. Cole returned with a plate of small bites. He looked at Tessa the way a person looks at a colleague they text too much. That is what I remember, not heat, not the clumsy electricity of people trying to hide. It was the ease. The ease made me uneasy. I tried to ask him something simple. "How is the new support schedule?" He gave me a polished summary that sounded like an email. Then the conversation slid to work acronyms, the kind that form a private language between people who sit under the same fluorescent hum. I excused myself and walked toward the restroom. On the way, I paused by a window. The glass reflected the room at an angle the way a mirror shows you 2 truths that do not meet. Cole leaned toward Tessa to hear her. She laughed, a hand on his arm for balance against the crowd. People do that, I told myself. People touch each other in rooms with loud music and low lights. I was not a detective. I was a woman who had learned to trust her first feeling, and my first feeling was not jealousy, it was absence, as if I were looking at a picture where I should be and seeing space instead. On the drive back to Portland, the wipers worked at a steady tempo. Cole set the house on navigation, even though we had made this drive 100 times. He turned the music up to an almost party volume. I waited a few miles, then I turned it down and told him I wanted to ask a real question. He glanced over with a practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. I asked who Tessa was to him beyond a title. He said she was an assistant for the team, and that she was ambitious, and that she made life easier, and that I always needed to understand things too deeply. He said it lightly, but the words had an edge. So I tried again. I said that lately he seemed to be somewhere else, even when he was next to me. I said that I missed talking to him like we used to. He took a breath that felt like an argument loading. He said that I analyzed everything. He said it as if analysis were a flaw rather than my craft and my care. I said I was not trying to fix him. I said I was trying to know him. I wanted to add that knowing is the tender verb inside love, but I could feel his patience thinning like ice at the end of winter. He rolled his shoulders and stared down the dark road. He said that living with a person who always dissected his moods was exhausting. He said that nothing could just be what it was with me. He said that my need to go deeper made him feel like a project. I felt heat rise in my chest. I watched the lights of a truck move past us like a slow comet. I said that asking is not cutting apart, it is reaching for. He laughed in a way that did not include me. Then he said it. He said that I was broken. He said it almost conversationally as if he were choosing a word off a menu. Broken. He said I tried to mend things that were not even cracked. I did not argue. The word did something inside me that I could feel but not name. It was both a slap and a diagnosis. It was also a bell. Something rang and I knew I would not unhear it. I looked out at the rain and counted 5 breaths. I pictured my office, the soft gray couch, the plant that needed more sun. I thought about how many times I had told a client that language reveals the map of the speaker. People tell you who they are by how they name you. I sat with that map while Cole merged into the left lane and let the music swallow the last of our conversation. We got home late. The porch light made a small halo on the steps. He carried nothing from the car. I carried the gift bag with company swag, a water bottle, a t-shirt with the North Arc logo, a postcard that said, "Build the future." I hung my coat and listened for his footsteps. He walked straight to the shower. I put the swag on the dining table and felt tired in my bones. I wiped a ring of condensation someone had left earlier. It felt like I was erasing a symbol I had not chosen. When he came into the kitchen, his hair damp, he reached for his phone and set it on the counter face down. A new habit. Notifications silenced. No banners, no preview text. The gesture looked small, ordinary, polite even. To me, it felt like a curtain had been pulled and then stapled shut. He said he was going to bed. He asked if I would turn off the front lights. His voice had the practiced neutrality of a coworker closing a meeting. Then he was gone down the hall. I stood alone in the kitchen. The house made its usual house sounds, heater clicking on, a neighbor's dog protesting a raccoon, the rain beginning again. I opened the refrigerator and stared at leftovers I did not want, pasta in a glass container, a few strawberries in a bowl. I closed the door and put both hands on the counter. My throat ached like I had swallowed a hard truth whole. I walked to the small desk where I keep my notebooks. The journal I use for my own thoughts is thin and cheap and hidden behind a stack of admin files because I never want my work and my private writing to be confused. I sat and wrote the way you write when you are not crafting a page for anyone else. I wrote that he called me broken and that the words slid right under my skin and took a seat. I wrote that I could not talk him out of that story. I wrote that I did not want to. I wrote that I do not have to fix the narrative living in another person. I wrote that if he sees me as broken, then the only faithful response is to become whole in a way that has nothing to do with his eyes. I stopped and looked at my handwriting. The lines were not neat. I did not try to make them neat. I pressed my palm to the paper and felt the slight warmth where ink had just dried. I thought about the first time Cole and I met at a fundraiser for a literacy nonprofit. He talked about his mother's favorite books. He laughed easily then. We were younger, and our ambition had not yet turned us inward. I remembered how we had planned to hike more and travel and learn the kind of cooking that takes all afternoon. It was not grief I felt. It was a distance that had already formed and simply made itself visible. I washed my face in the hall bathroom so the water would not wake him. I saw my reflection and did not linger. I turned off the kitchen light and the living room lamp and left only the small bulb over the stove. The house changed shape in the dim glow. I stood at the window and watched rain hatching on the sidewalk. I could smell wet earth and something clean. Night sounds layered over one another until they made a kind of quiet music. I thought about our porch swing and how we always said we would sit out there during summer storms. We never did. We were always pushing to some next milestone, next project, next trip that got postponed by another sprint at work. My body wanted stillness, not planning. The truth of that landed like my feet finding the bottom of a pool. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my calendar. I blocked a day with a single word: pause. I would not be dramatic. I would not make a scene. I would make space. I would see my mother for a weekend in Eugene. I would revisit my own boundaries with a colleague who offered to cover my Thursday afternoon slot. I would drink coffee on the porch swing alone and listen to rain without trying to fold it into meaning. I would not ask Cole to explain the word he had already chosen. I had heard it clearly. I would let it tell me what I needed to do. The refrigerator motor hummed. The floor felt cool through my socks. I took my notebook again and wrote 3 lines. Stop proving, start choosing, whole. I closed the cover and slid the book back into its place. I wiped the counter with slow strokes as if I were moving dust off a photograph. From down the hall, I heard the soft click of his phone as he checked it in the dark. That small sound told me more than any long talk would have. I turned the stove light off, and the house fell into a deeper shadow that felt honest. I inhaled slowly, 4 counts in, hold, 4, 6 counts out. The same simple breath I had taught so many clients when their nervous systems needed a different story than panic. My ribs loosened. The rain shifted to a steadier rhythm against the porch roof. I walked to the back door and opened it a few inches. Cool air, the smell of wet cedar. In the distance, a train horn faded like a memory leaving the station. I stood there with the door cracked and let the night touch my face. No analysis, no script, just a clear knowledge that a line had been crossed and that I was not going to spend my strength dragging it back. I closed the door gently and set the lock. I did not check my phone. I did not look for a message from anyone. I turned toward the dark hallway, then paused and looked once more at the window. The glass held a faint reflection of me, barely there enough to make me nod, as if I were greeting a person I had not seen in a long time. I switched off the last light. The room went quiet, except for the rain. My breath kept time. I walked down the hall and stopped outside the bedroom. I could hear Cole sleeping. That sound used to comfort me. Tonight, it was simply a fact. I went to the guest room and lay on top of the quilt my mother had sewn years ago. I whispered a thank you for the way fabric holds shape even after many washings. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the storm gather around me like a soft curtain. Morning could carry what it needed to carry. Tonight, I would practice something I had taught to others without fully living it. I would choose stillness. I would choose the smallest honest act, which was to let the word he used sit in the space and not try to make it kinder. I would breathe until my body remembered that wholeness does not depend on another person recognizing it. Outside, the rain eased. The house settled. I lay there awake in a new way and felt the first steady trace of peace move through me. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. Leaving the house. Not the hurt. Morning came like a soft knock on the door I finally felt ready to answer. I lay there a few minutes and listened to the quiet settle, then swung my feet to the floor and went to the kitchen. The house had that early light that makes everything look gentler than it is. I started coffee, rinsed an apple, opened my laptop, and faced the inbox I had avoided for weeks. A subject line from our credit card caught my eye. Monthly activity summary. I clicked and felt my jaw tighten in a calm way, the way a clinician feels when data confirms what the body already knows. Rideshare charges at odd hours between Seattle neighborhoods we never visited together. A boutique hotel in Belltown that did not match any conference or off-site Cole had mentioned. Meal receipts that read like small celebrations for 2. I did not slam a drawer or send a furious text. I took a breath and opened a new note. Separation checklist. I typed in a steady hand. Change personal email and banking passwords. Disable shared calendar access. Remove my card from any auto-pay he controls. Contact our utility companies for separate accounts. Confirm the deed and mortgage are in the correct names. Schedule a consult with a family law attorney for information on a separation agreement. Forward USPS mail to a secure box. I added call mom and Eugene because sometimes the most important step on any list is the reminder that you have a place to land. Cole texted just before 9, "Do not wait up tonight, stuck in Seattle." He added a thumbs up emoji that felt like a paper towel over a flood. I typed back, "Drive safe when you do head home," and put the phone face down on the table. I gathered the last 2 months of bank statements, took photos of the pages that showed the hotel, the late night rides, the rounds of craft cocktails. Not to build a case for a fight, at least not now, to build a clear picture for myself. Proof has a way of quieting the parts of you that want to negotiate with fog. I called the number a colleague had given me for a straightforward attorney who handled amicable separations when possible. The assistant answered in a bright voice and offered a 30-minute consult that afternoon by video. "Perfect," I said. "I will send a brief timeline and my questions before we meet." After I hung up, I changed the password on my email and the one for my cloud drive. I removed our shared calendar from my phone so I would not watch colored blocks of his time march through my weeks like little flags. I logged into our gas, electric, and internet accounts and submitted change requests to place them in my name only, not as a punishment, as housekeeping for a different life. I dropped a load of laundry into the washer, and while it turned, I opened a box where I kept cards and photos from our early years. I looked at a postcard from a road trip down the coast and felt the smallest ache, then put the lid back on and wrote, "Donate" on a sticky note for the set of wine glasses we bought for dinner parties we never hosted. The washer clicked off and I moved the clothes to the dryer. There was a clean mundanity to all of it. It soothed me to make small things right while the larger thing redefined itself. At noon, I drove to a nearby park and walked the loop trail while I called my mother. Diane picked up on the second ring. I told her I might come down to Eugene this weekend if she was free. There was a careful pause, the kind a mother gives an adult child when she knows not to rush the story. She said she was making chili and that there would be plenty if I arrived by dinner. I said some things were shifting and I might need her spare room for a night. She said of course, then said the sentence that always landed like a hand on my shoulder after a long day. "You do not have to explain everything to be welcome here." Back at the house, I made a sandwich I barely tasted and set up for the video consult with the attorney. Her name was Allison. She wore a navy sweater and had the calm tone of someone who has shepherded many people through a narrow season. I gave her the short version. Married 8 years, no children, a home in Portland, his job had become. Seattle-centric distance had turned to something else I wanted to separate carefully and legally and keep the temperature low. Allison nodded and asked about property accounts, retirement contributions, and what I wanted most. I said clarity and space. She outlined the basics of a separation agreement, how we could divide bills during a trial period, how to document our plan so that it protected both of us, what not to do if I wanted to avoid escalation. Do not move money in a way that looks punitive. Do not snoop in devices you do not own. Do not announce anything on social media before you have spoken in person. Do keep copies of what you need. Do set boundaries in writing. I took notes and felt my shoulders drop an inch. After we finished, I sent a short email to Cole. "I will be at my mom's in Eugene this weekend. I need a few days to think and arrange some things. We can talk next week about logistics. No accusations, no autopsy of the marriage in a paragraph. Just the scaffolding for a conversation I would be strong enough to have when the ground under me felt less new." Late afternoon, the house grew quiet in that specific way older homes do when the heat cycles off. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and looked at the bed we purchased our second year together. I remembered how we built the frame with an Allen wrench and laughed at the directions that seemed written in riddle form. I rolled a suitcase from the closet to the guest room and set it on the quilt my mother made, the one with squares from old dresses and curtains. I packed enough to feel prepared and not so much that the house felt raided. Jeans, the sweater I wear when I want to feel strong. 2 pairs of walking shoes, the necklace my aunt gave me. My notebook chargers, a small photo of me and my mother at the coast. I wrote a list in my phone titled Monday. Call utilities to confirm. Set appointment with bank to discuss joint account. Ask Allison to draft the initial separation framework. Place forwarding on mail. Let 2 clients know I will switch their sessions to telehealth for the week. Buy a spare key lockbox for the porch in case a friend needs to feed the plants while I am gone. The list felt like rails for a train that had already started to move. Around 7, Cole sent a second text. "Release rolled, staying north, do what you need." At a different time in our life, that last line might have sounded supportive. Tonight it read like a permission slip he did not own the right to issue. I typed a neutral reply, noted. I went room to room and took photographs, not out of suspicion but to fix things in my mind. The bookcases with their uneven rows, the small chip in the blue bowl we used for salad, the porch swing still with its tiny creak. I set the photos in a folder labeled House Now and closed the app. I showered and let the water run a little longer than usual. When I stepped out, the mirror was fogged and I was glad for the blur. I put on soft clothes, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table with a pen. I wrote a one-page letter to myself about the kind of woman I intended to be in this next stretch. Patient with herself, clear with others, brave enough to choose quiet over chaos. I folded the page and put it in the pocket of my overnight bag. Morning came without drama. I woke before the alarm and watched the ceiling lighten. I texted my first client to confirm that our session would move online for the next week. She wrote back a simple thanks and a see you then. I watered the plant in my office that leans toward the window. I emptied the dishwasher and left the door cracked so it would not trap a smell. I wrote a small note for Cole because I wanted my part of this to be clean. On the kitchen counter by the bowl where we keep keys, I placed my house key on a folded card. The card said what needed saying in one clear sentence. I am not broken. I simply no longer belong in a place where someone else defines me. I did not add my name. He knew the handwriting. I picked up my bag, took a last look at the living room, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind me. The morning was cool, the kind of crisp that wakes you without caffeine. I put my bag in the trunk and started the car. The radio came alive somewhere in the middle of a song I used to love and then got tired of. I switched stations until I found the one that plays old favorites at odd hours. The night we met floated into the car like a memory I could handle. I pulled away from the curb and headed for the Fremont Bridge. Traffic was light. The Willamette looked like brushed steel under a pale sky. I crossed the span and watched the city tilt in the rear view as the road curved. The downtown skyline gave way to neighborhoods and then to the green that always surprises me even after years here. I felt my chest loosen with each mile. I talked to myself in the quiet car the way I sometimes coach clients on their first solo flight after leaving a hard place. Keep breathing. Keep your hands soft on the wheel. You have enough gas and enough courage. That is enough. South of town, I stopped for fuel and a coffee. The barista asked about my day, and I said I was heading to see family. He said safe travels and meant it in that way strangers do when they add a little blessing without knowing. Back on the road, I passed a sign for a state forest, and on impulse turned off to a small overlook I remembered from a fall drive years ago. I parked, stepped out, and let the cool air find my skin. The trees were damp from last night's rain, and the ground smelled like cedar and earth. I stood there and breathed until my shoulders dropped another inch. I said the word out loud to the trees and to myself. Enough. Not dramatic, not triumphant, simply true. Enough of the story in which someone else narrates me. Enough of the quiet I hand to a person who will not meet me halfway with curiosity. Enough of holding still so someone else will not be inconvenienced by my depth. The wind carried my voice a little, and then the forest took the sound and made it part of its own hush. I got back into the car and checked the time. If I kept a steady pace, I would reach Eugene by late morning and have a few hours to help Mom chop onions and stir the pot and let normal tasks knit the world back together. I drove the rest of the way without the radio, letting the hum of the tires be company. I thought about what I would say to Cole when we finally sat across from each other at our table. I would tell him the plan. I would not litigate the past. I would not try to persuade him out of whatever story he needed to live in. I would state my boundaries like facts. We will separate finances. We will share the calendar only for necessary items until we decide what to do with the house. We will use email for logistics so the signal is clean. We will be courteous. We will be firm. The city limits sign for Eugene came up, and with it the familiar low buildings and the small bookstores and the bakery where Mom buys the good bread. I turned down her street and saw her on the porch, cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows, a mug in her hand. She waved once and did not rush down the steps. She always lets me arrive all the way before she moves toward me. I parked, stepped out, and she opened her arms. The hug was simple and long, no questions that needed answers too soon. We went inside, and she set me to work rinsing beans and measuring spices. She told me the neighbor's cat had taken to sleeping on her doormat, and that the school where she used to teach had asked her to read during their literacy night. I told her about a client's garden project without details and about a new cafe near my office with a bright blue door. She handed me a wooden spoon and nodded toward the pot. Stir. I stirred and felt my breathing match the slow circles. She looked at me and spoke in that measured way she has when she wants to place a small truth on the table without pushing it toward me. Sometimes silence is the clearest sentence you can offer. I nodded. I am tired of proving, I said. I want to live, not audition. She touched my forearm and said, "Live then." We ate at the small table by the window. After dishes, I carried my bag to the guest room and set it on the quilt that smells like line-dried summer even in March. I texted Allison to confirm next steps for Monday and set an alarm to call the bank first thing. I checked my phone one last time. No new messages from Cole. I powered it down and placed it face down on the dresser as if to reverse an old ritual. The afternoon light shifted and warmed the room. I lay back for a moment and let my eyes close. Not to escape. To rest the part of me that had been scanning for the next blow. When I opened them again, the window held a square of blue and a branch traced on it like a line drawing. I stood and went to the glass. My reflection was faint and calm. I did not wave or smile at it. I simply recognized myself. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere a dog barked once and then decided there was nothing to defend. I breathed and felt the quiet continue inside me. It was not the brittle quiet of denial. It was the kind that lets you hear your own steps as you take them. I had chosen, and the road in front of me was honest. In the morning, I would drive back through Portland across the Fremont Bridge and into a week of calls and lists and papers that would formalize what my body already knew. For now, I stood in the late light and let it rest on my face until it felt like an agreement between me and the day. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The Work of Healing. By spring, the rhythm of my days had changed. I woke early, made coffee, and wrote before the sun rose high enough to reach the kitchen window. The words came slowly at first, small entries meant only for myself. I called the folder The Wholeness Project because I needed a name that sounded like a direction rather than a confession. Each morning, I wrote about breathing through panic, about rebuilding routines, about silence that could heal instead of hurt. When I finally published the first piece on a free blogging site, I did it without telling anyone. I watched the stats creep to 20 views, then 30. I knew most of those clicks were mine. Still, it felt like a start. The writing was a practice, not a performance. By June, the small circle of readers had grown women who signed their comments with names like "a fellow survivor" or "trying to begin again." Rachel, my closest friend, found out about the blog when I left my laptop open during a visit. She taught yoga downtown, all calm focus, wrapped in humor, sharp enough to cut self-pity before it took hold. She read a few paragraphs and looked up at me. "You're sitting on something people need," she said. "I'm just writing to keep myself steady," I told her. She smiled, handing back the laptop. "Then you're halfway there. Bring it into the world. Words are meant to breathe." It was Rachel who pushed me to host a small gathering at her studio one Saturday in August. She said she would handle the mats, the tea, and the playlist if I promised to talk about the parts of healing that people never say aloud. I laughed at the thought of standing in front of strangers. Still, I agreed. We called it Emotional Resilience for Women, a workshop that sounded clinical enough to protect the vulnerability underneath. 25 women showed up, filling the space with the quiet hum of anticipation. Some were recently divorced, others recovering from layoffs or losses that had no formal name. I spoke for an hour about the body's instinct to tense and how gentleness could be a discipline. I talked about rewriting the story that names you as broken. At one point, I saw a woman in the back wipe her eyes, and something inside me steadied instead of shaking. Afterward, they formed a loose circle around me, asking about journaling, about forgiveness, about the fear of being alone too long. I told them the truth as I understood it, that loneliness can be a teacher if you stop treating it like punishment. When the last woman left, Rachel hugged me and whispered, "You just found the thing you were meant to do next." By fall, the blog's audience had grown to 50,000 readers. I received emails from places I had never been, Chicago, Austin, even Dublin. Most of them said thank you in one way or another. A few shared entire stories paragraphs that felt like lifelines tossed across water. I tried to read them all until it became too much. My mornings began to fill with other people's heartbreak, and I could feel my boundaries bending. I added a note at the top of the blog explaining that I could not respond individually, but that I read with respect. It was the first time I practiced distance as an act of care. One morning, I received a message from Dr. Elise Monroe, my old mentor from graduate school. She had seen my name attached to a shared post on social media. She wrote that she was proud and wanted to introduce me to someone who could help expand the work. We met at a cafe near the university. Elise looked exactly as I remembered, composed but approachable. She was with a man around her age, tall glasses slipping down his nose. "This is David Monroe," she said, "no relation except through too many years in publishing." He shook my hand. "I edit for Westbridge Press. Your blog has a voice we have been searching for." I laughed, unsure whether to take it seriously. "It's just a series of essays. That's where all the good books start," he said. "Write like you're talking to yourself. Let readers listen in. We'll help you shape it." I told him I had no interest in writing a self-help manual filled with slogans. He nodded. "Good. Write truth, not comfort. That sells longer." Elise sipped her coffee and added, "Think of it as an extension of the workshop, just reaching farther." I promised to think about it, though the idea of a book with my name on it made me nervous. After the meeting, I walked along the river path feeling both flattered and cautious. Publishing meant exposure, and I wasn't sure I wanted that. Around that time, one of my essays titled "He Said I Was Broken" was shared on Reddit. Overnight, my inbox flooded. Thousands of upvotes comments layered with empathy, anger, advice. Women quoted lines back to me as if they were spells. A few men argued that I was blaming all husbands. Others accused me of dramatizing a simple breakup. I read too much that first night, my heart swinging between gratitude and exhaustion. By morning, I turned off notifications, made tea, and stared at the blinking cursor of a new post titled, "Boundaries Are Love." Rachel called later that day. "You're viral," she said. "That sounds like an illness," I replied. "It can be if you let it," she said. "Don't read the comments. Post, then close the door. Remember, you don't owe the crowd your peace." I laughed softly. "I'll try. Try harder," she said. "You have to protect the voice that got you here." I took her advice. I limited comments, disabled direct messages, and scheduled writing hours like therapy sessions with myself. The structure gave me room to breathe again. As winter came, I found new steadiness. Clients noticed it too. One woman told me she could hear calm in my voice now, like a song under the surface. I realized that healing was not an event, but a practice of attention repeated until it became muscle memory. In January, David called to follow up about the book. "We'll keep the title simple," he said. "Maybe whole, maybe something that points to transformation without cliché." I said I would send a few sample chapters. He sounded genuinely excited. After we hung up, I sat in my office and looked at the shelves where I kept professional texts. They all used the language of pathology, anxiety, trauma, dysfunction. I wanted to write something that spoke about repair without sounding clinical. I wanted a book that made wholeness feel possible in ordinary kitchens between loads of laundry in the pauses where no one is watching. The day I finished the first full draft of a proposal, I decided to mark the change in some physical way. The wedding ring had been in a small jewelry box for nearly a year. I opened it and studied the plain gold band that once meant permanence. I took it to a local metalsmith who specialized in custom redesigns. She was a quiet woman with silver hair tied in a scarf. I told her I wanted to melt the ring down and create something new, a small pendant I could wear close but not heavy. She nodded and asked if I wanted to keep the engraving inside. I said no, let it all become one surface again. A week later, she called to say it was ready. When I arrived, she handed me a necklace with a simple teardrop pendant warm to the touch. "It's lighter than before," she said. I clasped it around my neck and caught my reflection in the shop mirror. It suited me, plain and luminous in a quiet way. That evening, I walked into a salon I had passed by a dozen times but never entered. The stylist, a young woman with buzzed hair dyed copper, asked what I wanted. "Something that feels like now," I said. She smiled. "We can do that." The scissors made a soft rhythm, strands falling like sentences that had served their purpose. When she finished, the reflection showed a shorter cut framing my face, simple and clean. At home, I stood by the window where morning light used to find me writing. The city outside was damp with drizzle, and the sky turned the color of pewter. I touched the pendant lightly, feeling the faint warmth of the metal against my skin. Maybe being broken was only the first draft of being whole, I thought. Maybe all along the cracks were blueprints for light. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The air carried a mix of rain and coffee from the shop on the corner. The street glistened leaves scattered like small gold notes on the pavement. I walked without destination, only direction. My shoulders were back, my breath even. The pendant caught a shard of sunlight breaking through the clouds, and for a second I could feel the pulse of my own life moving forward, quiet and sure. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4: When the Past Knocks. The following spring arrived fast and full of work. I had accepted an invitation to lead a regional workshop in Seattle, the largest one I had done so far. The event was hosted at a conference center overlooking Lake Union, and one of the sponsors was a restructured branch of Blue Peak Technologies now under new ownership. I smiled at the irony but chose not to read into it. My focus was on content timing and keeping my nerves steady. The morning of the event, I sat in the hotel room with coffee and opened my laptop to review slides. A new email appeared in my inbox, and the name at the top froze me for a moment. It was from Cole. The subject line read simply, "Professional request." I clicked, half expecting a short apology or something equally unfinished. Instead, the words were formal, like a letter to a stranger. He wrote that he was applying for a new role in a leadership consultancy and needed references from peers who could attest to his emotional leadership style. He asked if I would provide one given my background in psychology and our shared history. I read it twice before replying. My response was only one sentence. That would be a conflict of interest. I hit send and closed the laptop. An hour later, I stood on the stage of the conference hall as attendees filtered in. The room filled with low conversation and the soft shuffle of chairs. I smoothed the front of my blazer, took a deep breath, and adjusted the microphone. The first session began smoothly. I talked about self-regulation, trust, and the way people mistake silence for peace when it is often just suppression. Halfway through the talk, I noticed movement at the back of the room. A man slipped into the last row. I kept speaking, but my focus blurred for a heartbeat. It was him, Cole. His hair was shorter, streaked with gray, his posture tired. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit the way it used to. He didn't take notes, just watched. I stayed centered, finishing my session with a guided breathing exercise. When the audience applauded, I thanked them, collected my notes, and walked toward the exit. I needed air. Outside, the drizzle had started, typical for Seattle in early spring. The street smelled of rain and roasted coffee from a nearby cafe. I was halfway to the elevator when I heard his voice behind me. "Julia." I turned slowly. "I didn't expect this," he said. "You look different." I met his eyes. Healing does that. He tried to smile, but it looked like effort. "You're doing workshops now. I saw the brochure online. I wasn't sure if I should come." "You already did," I said, keeping my tone even. He nodded, glancing at the ground. "Blue Peak folded last year. Bad management, bad timing. Mara left before that. She's engaged now, I think." I waited silent. He shifted his shoulders, rounding as if the weight of his own story pressed down. "I've been trying to rebuild," he said. "It hasn't been easy. I thought maybe you could help me reshape my professional image. People still respect your opinion. You could vouch for me, talk about how I led with empathy." The words hung awkwardly between us. He wanted my voice to restore his reputation, the same voice he once called too analytical, too much. I reached into my bag and pulled out a card case. I handed him one. He looked down at it, reading the embossed letters. "Dr. Julia Hart, The Wholeness Project." "I can't do what you're asking," I said. "That would cross a boundary. But if you're serious about working through some of this, I can refer you to a therapist I trust. Someone good." He looked at the card again, then at me. "So that's it. You won't even talk to me about it." "I'm talking to you now," I said. "Just not in the way you expect." He gave a small, forced laugh. "You really have changed." "No," I said softly. "I'm still me. I just stopped needing to be fixed." For a moment, the sound of rain filled the silence between us. He nodded once, put the card in his pocket, and said, "I guess I deserve that." "There's no punishment here, Cole," I said. "Just consequence." He looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. "Do you ever think about us?" "I think about who I was," I said. "Not who we were." He took a step back, the look in his eyes somewhere between regret and recognition. "Maybe someday you can forgive me." I already have, I said, surprising both of us. He frowned slightly. You have. Forgiveness isn't for them. I said it's for me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Take care, Julia. I nodded. You too. He walked away toward the parking garage, shoulders hunched, the back of his coat dark with rain. I stood there a moment longer, feeling both lighter and strangely sad. Some stories don't end with triumph. They end with understanding. That evening, back in my hotel room, I hung my jacket on the chair and sat by the window overlooking the city. Raindrops streaked the glass, distorting the lights below. I opened my laptop to check emails, half expecting another message from him. There was none. Only a reminder from my assistant about the next workshop date. I opened a new document instead and typed a few sentences for myself. The past doesn't vanish when you heal. It knocks to see if you will still open the door. I saved the file and closed it. Outside, the rain turned heavier, drumming softly against the glass. I walked to the desk, picked up the business card he had given me years ago, the one I had kept tucked in an old folder. I placed it inside a drawer, shut it gently, and turned the small key in the lock. The sound of the click felt final but kind. I sat for a while listening to the rain. The city moved below, neon reflected in puddles, buses sighing at every stop. I realized I wasn't angry, not anymore, just tired in a clean way, the kind that comes after hard work. I reached for the lamp, turned it off, and let the room fade to gray. Somewhere outside, thunder murmured far off over the sound. I watched the faint glow of streetlights blur through the wet window until my eyes softened. Tomorrow would be another day of speaking, teaching, and maybe writing. Tonight was simply the sound of rain on glass and the quiet certainty that the door behind me had finally closed. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you, Chapter 5. Whole Without You. By the time a full year passed, life had softened into a new rhythm that felt both earned and unexpected. The book I had spent 2 winters shaping, Whole Without You, came out in early spring. I remembered holding the first printed copy in my hands, the cover simple white and calm, my name pressed in small silver letters. I thought of the girl who had once sat on a kitchen floor trying to understand the word broken and realized she would never have believed this part of the story. The launch weeks blurred into travel and interviews, rooms filled with women who wanted to talk about quiet kinds of strength. I was learning to enjoy the public work without losing the private peace that had made it possible. The book climbed the charts small step by small step until someone from my publisher called to say it had entered the bestseller list. I thanked them, then hung up and went for a walk instead of celebrating. Success felt less like applause and more like an exhale. By summer, invitations from talk shows and conferences filled my calendar. When CNN Women reached out, I hesitated, then agreed. It felt right to close this arc with a conversation, not a performance. The recording took place in New York in a glass studio high above the streets. The host, Evelyn Brooks, had a calm voice that carried authority without sharpness. She had read every page of the book and greeted me as if we already shared a quiet understanding. The cameras rolled, the lights softened, and she began. When he called you broken, she asked, what did you feel in that moment? I looked at her, then at the small audience behind the glass. At the time, I said I felt stripped of something I thought I had built with care, but now I feel grateful. That word pushed me to rebuild, and what I built after wasn't fragile anymore. Evelyn smiled. You wrote in the final chapter that healing is not a reaction but a reclamation. What did you mean? I let out a slow breath. I meant that when we stop seeing healing as payback, we start to see it as ownership. It's not revenge, it's reclaiming what was always ours to begin with. The crew stayed quiet for a beat, then Evelyn said, "That's powerful." The rest of the interview moved easily, full of laughter, honesty, and the kind of relief that follows long silence. When it ended, the producers thanked me, and I walked outside into the early evening air. New York hummed around me, and I felt small but steady, exactly the size of my own life. While I spoke on television, a different scene played out 3 states away. In a small apartment north of Seattle, Cole sat on a worn couch with the television light flickering across his face. The volume was low, the coffee on his table gone cold. He had aged into a quiet that looked permanent. On the screen, my face appeared framed by the soft lighting of the studio. He leaned forward slightly, watching the woman he used to know speak in sentences that didn't include him. Healing isn't revenge, I said on the screen. It's reclamation. Cole's hand paused halfway to the remote. He watched me smile, then looked down at the stack of job applications beside him. He filled in a blank space on the form, hesitated, and then stopped. The light from the television flickered against the window, showing his reflection superimposed over mine. He reached for the remote and turned the sound off. The room fell still except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He sat there for a long time, eyes unfocused as if waiting for the next line of dialogue that would not come. A week later, I was back in Portland for a book signing at a local shop that smelled of paper and cedar. People lined up books pressed to their chests, faces kind and open. They told me their stories in quick bursts: loss, change, relief. When the line thinned, I saw a young woman lingering near the end, holding her copy close. She stepped forward with a small smile. "My name is Clara," she said. "I was at your first workshop 2 years ago in Seattle." I nodded, remembering her face. She looked stronger now, her hair shorter, her posture light. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Your story saved me. I left someone who kept calling me too much. I thought it was love to shrink for someone else, but now I know better." I touched the book gently before signing. "I'm glad you chose yourself," I said. Her eyes glistened. "I'm still learning, but it feels right." After she left, I sat for a while longer, the pen resting between my fingers. I whispered to the empty table. Then it was worth every scar. When the store closed, I walked home through the cool air of early evening. The city had the quiet pulse of contentment that comes at the end of a long day. My apartment was simple, filled with books, soft lamps, and the hum of things that worked. I poured a glass of water, set my bag down, and looked at the framed photograph on the shelf, the one from our wedding day. I had kept it for years without knowing why. Tonight I lifted it carefully from the frame and slipped the picture out. Only the blank mat remained clean and white. I set it back upright on the shelf. The empty space felt like honesty. The next morning, sunlight poured through the balcony window, catching on the pendant at my throat. I stepped outside the city, still waking, and leaned against the railing. The trees below swayed in slow rhythm, and somewhere a dog barked once and then quieted. The air smelled of rain drying on concrete. I closed my eyes and let the light warm my face. My mind drifted to every woman who had written every voice that had echoed parts of my own. There was peace in knowing that pain once shared had turned into something that could guide others home. I spoke softly as if to the morning itself. If you've ever been called too much, too emotional, or broken, remember those were never flaws. They were your map back to yourself. I let the words hang in the air and felt them settle. I could imagine them traveling to someone who needed them, maybe whispered through a screen or spoken in a quiet kitchen across the country. Then I smiled, turned back inside, and opened my notebook to begin something new. Not a story of loss or revenge, but one of becoming. The pendant at my neck caught another sliver of light, a small sun resting against my heart. Outside, the city moved at its steady pace, unaware and perfect. I sat down to write the page bright and blank, and for the first time I felt whole.